Hi, welcome to Sacred Time. I'm Dennis Kaminsky. Joining me, my friend, Big Blurred. That is not his legal name,
No.
but that is what we are going to address him as. Which, before we start, would you like to explain Big Blurred to the people at home who don't know what the fuck that means?
Um. Yeah. Big is kind of self-explanatory. Just kind of what I am, but the blurred is just a mixture of the word black and nerd, and definitely identify as such. So it's it's what I'm going with, and I'm gonna stick with it.
So when you see him, please call him Big Black Nerd. That's what he prefers.
or blurred. That's probably
Okay, that
better.
makes a different. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, this is a little less sort of offensive, but hey, I don't. I wouldn't take offense to it, but it just sounds a lot offensive.
Yeah, it's a lot worse when you don't put the word together like that.
Yeah.
But no, this is Sacred Time. This is our podcast. We started this about a year ago, and we ended up giving it a break because we didn't fully have it realized. We still don't fully have it realized, so work with us as we proceed along. But we encourage people to send us critiques, things that they like, interact with us, let us know what we can do better, all that kind of good standard content creating shit.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to get it going. I've been friends with Blurred for about 16 years now, so I'm excited to go through our journey as friends and show people our dynamic in the real world. I don't know if I got anything else to add on the basic intro stuff. Introducing myself isn't fun. It's really awkward. I did a job one time. I was working at Amazon, and before you started, they put everybody in these little circles, and they did like a game to introduce themselves. And it was uncomfortable because, like, I don't know what my characteristics are that people give a shit about. And I feel weird highlighting certain things. So when you start by introducing yourself, like it's I don't know where to go. And I remember everybody's in that
Yeah.
little circle just waiting for somebody to talk. So I was like, all right, fuck it, I'll start. Hi, I'm Dennis. I used to work at a Domino's. And there we go.
Yeah.
And then I
I,
realized like that probably did it. They probably learned as much about me as they possibly could have in one sentence from that one sentence.
Probably. I mean, I also just look at it like it's kind of what I want them to know. Not to say I'm super secretive,
Oh
but
yeah, you are.
you know, I mean, I'll introduce myself and then either mention something I like or just say like you said, where the last time I worked. But depending on the situation, especially if it's like I'm just working here and I'm new, I don't know who I really want to know what about me yet. So I keep it as basic as possible.
So what's your
'Cause,
approach to the podcast? Are we keeping it basic or are we going to open up our souls to the people who are spending the good time listening?
well, I mean, it's called Sacred Time for a reason. So I think it's only right that we do go into a little detail about some things because, yeah, you kind of want to know the person you're listening to, what they're about, what their interests are, to see if you maybe really understand certain points that might come up at whatever time. But with that said, I guess we could just talk about real quick like how we even met.
Yeah, do you remember how we met?
Yeah, I don't remember time wise at all because at one point I thought I was like maybe 12 at the time. I know for a fact I wasn't 12, but whatever it was,
You would have been a year younger. It was 2005.
yeah, would have been about 11 then. But nah, I moved on the street, new city, didn't know anybody. He popped up on my doorstep asking if me and my brother could play, and surprisingly, my mom said yes because that was the one thing I was like pretty sure moving out there wasn't going to be a thing as far as uh, visiting people and being around people, and then it was more just a safety thing with my mom. She wasn't like restrictive or anything, but didn't think at all that when and I'm
Why
gonna
did you
say
guys move
this.
from your previous place? I think that would give some pretty good context, if I remember correctly.
Well, yeah, we moved from our last place because the last place, the actual management there robbed us. They went through our house, like flipped it upside down, and then tried to blame it on the fact that there was a school nearby and kids would walk near the property. And they said like, "Oh yeah, it must have been one of those kids breaking into the house," and it was obvious they did it. It was like the whole guilty shit where you just want to obsessively make sure it's known there's no possible way you had any connection to it.
No, they cover every
It's like,
single end. Yeah.
I mean, even if it was me,
Unintentionally
I couldn't do that. I hurt my back, and that's a big ass mattress spring, so I wouldn't be able to move that. It's impossible.
They call you like a week later. They're like, actually, I just thought of another reason why I couldn't have done it.
Yep.
And you're like, oh, I thought we already talked about
Shit.
this. And like, yeah, but this one's more definitive than the last one I told you. So I just felt like I should also, just so you're aware that it was not me.
Yep. Shit, like, yeah, I wanted to steal a GameCube. I already have a GameCube.
Yeah.
So who the fuck said our GameCube got stolen? But all right. But it was also just one of those situations where we weren't going to get justice for it. So instead of trying to fight it or deal with the situation any further than that, we bounced, found somewhere else. Ended
Clearly,
up-
subconsciously, you guys must have thought that shit was real because when I knocked on the door, you said everybody got paranoid. You guys thought the kids were coming back to steal more stuff.
no,
You're like,
nobody
shit, he's
was
one
worried
of those
about
kids
that.
that got dropped off down the street. And I was like, I know where you guys live.
Well, the bad part was the kids they were insinuating didn't look like you, so that was no issue there.
Pretty skinny
But
guy.
but nah, it was definitely for the better. I mean, the place we were at anyway was just very it was an apartment complex, so there's only so much you could do anyway. So being able to move into an actual house was fun just because it meant we could actually have a neighborhood to hang out in and meet people and all that kind of stuff. Didn't really meet anybody other than you, or at least associated with anybody other than you.
Nice,
So
yeah.
yeah, no, it was that part of it was cool.
Oh yeah, no, I remember when you guys moved in. I was excited to test out to see if the new kids were as shitty as the old kids, because I wasn't a big fan of all the friends I had on the street. So I was like, oh yeah, hopefully these kids are all right. You guys were all right. I mean, clearly hung around for a while. So
Yeah, I think more than anything, it's just the growing up part. You know, like a lot of that because we were still like relatively young at that point. It was just a lot of growing up together and trying to figure shit out. So sometimes together, sometimes like just knowing that whatever's going on, we're still both present in those moments.
oh yeah,
That is something that I definitely find invaluable in the sense of I don't think it's always common to be able to kind of identify somebody that like outside of a sibling, of course, if you have one, but someone you can legit say like, hey, I grew up with this person. I know where they were, where they came from, why they are the way they are now, and to have that kind of to know that those truths and have that honesty with somebody is rare. So
no, I
it's-
agree completely. I'm very grateful for our relationship. I absolutely view you as a sibling. I agree. I feel like it's a similar way. We grew up with each other. We're within a year apart of each other, so we were experiencing a lot of the same things in life at the same time. Actually, to that point, I was going to ask you, was there ever a moment when you look back on growing up where you felt like the flip switched? Do you know what I mean? Where you started to realize, like, oh shit, this is somebody who I think I'm probably going to maintain an association with? Because I think that's really interesting, because I've always been friends with a lot of people, and I think when I look back, sometimes I don't really remember what's the thing that puts it over, but I think I do when it comes to you, and I'll share that in just a second if you don't have something.
Oh no, yeah. You know, I think for me, and especially just because I'm somebody that I'm try to be pretty considerate in like what people share with me or what they talk to me about, because there was a time, like, quick side story, there was a time where I was going to my old high school before I transferred to where we went, and there was this guy who was having some trouble. He was getting bullied and whatnot, and I just so happened to be there. We started talking, and he just told me all this different stuff about how he was so tired of being bullied, but then the conversation went into what he had a passion for and what he wanted to do in life and how he was working to reach that goal. And by the end of the conversation, even though I really didn't do anything except for sit there and listen, it made his days so much better, and he felt this relief. And then after that, every time he would see me, he'd go out his way, "Hey man, how you doing?" And
Yeah.
it was a great feeling. So it made me realize, like, you know, I think it's real easy for us nowadays to kind of be in a conversation and not really be in the conversation. Kind of like how I'm sure there's some people listening to this podcast and they may be doing other things, but they're not just focusing directly
My
on,
guess is it's playing on their phone.
something like that. They're driving, they're working on something, whatever it is. But it's moments where I think it's only the I think it's one of the most human things to do, that you have to kind of slow down and really pay attention to the people you associate yourself with, because those moments a lot of times are like once in a lifetime things. You may not see this person ever again, but if you focus and take care of what that exchange is, it could be something that is a part of you going forward in a way deeper manner than you may have even thought it could be. So that whole thing aside, we were having a conversation one day, just you and me in the basement, and it was about some heavy
Basement
stuff.
at the house that I used to stay at.
Yeah, that's
Probably referenced the basement more than once. That's actually where we came up with the idea for Sacred Time a long time ago. But good.
no, yeah. But we were having a conversation, and it was a heavy conversation, but it was one that kind of similar to that other conversation I mentioned. I personally didn't do a lot of talking, but you had a lot to talk about. You had a lot to explain. And when I realized what we were talking about was something that was very much you, in the sense of this wasn't a conversation about wrestling. This wasn't a conversation about music. This wasn't some of these other passionate conversations we had before. This was a passion coming from just what you were going through at that time. That made me realize, like, clearly I'm somebody that he trusts and he feels that was worth taking his time and explaining what was going on. And I took that to heart, because I'm like, again, you didn't have to explain anything to me. You didn't have to tell me anything about what was going on, but you felt the need to do so, for one, because you felt it was right for me to know in that case. But I also believe in the case it was because you knew that I was someone that was going to take it seriously and really care about what you had to say. So it was that moment for me that kind of made me go, like, yeah, this is totally different. This isn't like any other friendship I had with this person or that person, because I take the trust that you have to put into someone seriously. If you're putting that trust into me, then it makes me believe and know that I can do the same to you, because it'd be reciprocated. And that's kind of just how it was, how I felt about it.
That's interesting. I know you don't want to put my personal business out there, but was this a conversation about my dad?
Yeah.
That's actually the exact same moment that I was thinking about referencing. So I'm really happy to hear that the
Hey,
term
man.
was reciprocated at the time.
We're killing this
But
shit.
yeah, when I was a little bit younger, my dad passed away. My dad passed away when I was 16 years old, and I was struggling, obviously, with it at the time quite a bit. And I didn't feel like I had a lot of people who... I felt like a lot of people at the time kind of danced around the subject quite a bit. It was a very heavy subject, and I think most people were aware of the circumstances, but they also didn't really want to get into them with me because they were difficult. For context, anybody who obviously doesn't know me or my story, my dad committed suicide when I was 16 years old. So at the time, I think most of the people that I associated with were aware of that fact. But it's a very difficult subject to approach, right? Especially with somebody like me who, like, I'm generally really goofy. I push it off a lot. I don't take stuff, seriously all the time. So I think for a lot of people, it was a difficult subject to approach. And I remember with you, I don't remember what sparked the conversation specifically, but you asked me a question. Like, it was a serious question about it, like, in regards to how I was doing. And it felt really good at the time because I wasn't getting that question very often. Do you know what I mean? And in fairness, I mean, I was carrying myself as if I were okay. So it's not like I was putting off that I needed help to anybody. As a matter of fact, most of the time, I kind of tried to go in the opposite direction. I was trying to, put on a good face and kind of be the man in the situation and make sure everything was being taken care of. Although, in retrospect, I was way too young and not nearly emotionally capable of handling something like that. But I remember in the moment when you asked me about it, because I remember the conversation in the basement as well. I believe we were talking about it stemmed through Stairway to Heaven, if I remember correctly. Because the day that it happened, I remember sitting in the car, and the thing that made me break was I was listening to the radio and Stairway to Heaven came on. And you asked me before that, like, what specifically makes Stairway to Heaven to you one of the best songs ever? And then I remember kind of pouring that on. And then after that, you asked me, how are you doing with all of that? And like I said, that was the first time that I'd gotten that question. And it was a very natural, like I said, through music. It was just through something that we would bullshit about, regularly. And I agree. It opens up a trust. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like you've always been very, you've always taken the conversations that we had very seriously. You've treated my business very seriously. I respect the fact that when we started the conversation, you didn't specifically mention what the conversation was, out of just, respect for the fact that maybe it's not something that I would specifically want to talk about. But like I said, it's sacred time, so I am 100% open for anything. But yeah, that's exactly how I felt too, man. It was after my dad passed away, we had a conversation, and it felt good. I really needed it at the time, and it was the right conversation. It wasn't even anything crazy. It was just, where you at? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was really nice in that moment to just kind of explain to people, like, it's been hard, this happened, and I didn't feel like this was fair, and I felt like this was a tough situation to approach, and this and that and the other thing. And like I said, like you mentioned, you were very patient. You just listened, and it helped quite a bit.
I was fucking nervous because the more you talked about it, now I'm remembering exactly what we were talking about. And I remember I wanted to ask, but kind of to your point where I think with anybody, you're not really sure how people are truly doing. So you don't know if maybe approaching something is a good idea or not. For me, it was kind of like the same, like, I don't know if this is something you want to talk about, but if it is, I didn't want to just like deny that or neglect it, to be like, oh, well,
Yeah.
I don't know, so I'm just not going to at least reach out. And like I said, man, I think a lot of times, just generally everybody, there are certain moments, certain things that you realize, like, it's like it's a feeling you can't describe, but when you recognize it, like, okay, this is different from most things.
I agree.
And that's how that
Connection.
it's a
You feel that kind of
connection.
stuff with people, and you're like, this is somebody who, on like a certain emotional level, I can connect with, and it makes me feel like a certain sense of security in going in these subjects that I maybe don't want to explore with other people.
Yeah, and I think it's something that doesn't always get enough attention. Maybe I'm trying to say attention. Maybe it's more like a enough emphasis on it, in a sense. Like I said, we're everything's so fast paced. Everything's so like, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? Move on to the next one. And sometimes I think it's better, like, you should slow down a bit, because you gotta still assess what's really going on, where you're at, and where you're going, and what you want to do with whatever the situation is. And sometimes it's just having a conversation with someone and being locked in. No cell phone, no whatever, just really having that talk. And like you said, that ultimately is what led to Sacred Time being a thing, because it was literally like, hey, we're not watching shit. We might have some music in the background, but we're just having conversations right now.
Yeah, I was going to say that conversation was one of the early conversations that we had where we started opening up a lot in life. And we had another person who we were hanging out with a lot at the time who was originally a part of Sacred Time, but he's a little busy right now. We're hoping to get him back on as it goes. Yeah. I'm saying that so when you watch it, you're incited to do it. But no, so basically, you, me, and our friend Dylan would stay the night at my house all the time, and we'd sleep in the basement. And then every night before bed, when you're, just like laying down and not really paying attention to anything else, and it's just like the three of you, we're sleeping in the same bed, so it's a very intimate situation. We're all on top of each other. It's sweaty. You have absolutely no choice but to acknowledge one another. No, we had a couch, so you and Dylan.
It was a section.
The very
large. It was a big ass couch
with each other. You guys had you probably could have done it in the social distancing age. It was a pretty large couch.
Yeah.
And then I had my own little bed, my own little area. I got to sleep like a king every night. But yeah, no, so every night before bed, we would start just talking about whatever we had on our minds. And we started noticing that period between us turning off our phones and us falling asleep was like the most honest conversations that we were ever having with anybody in our entire lives, for better or for worse, because sometimes honesty is a very tough thing to approach, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because then you realize, like, oh, fuck, I'm weird. But, yeah, so we would have those conversations all the time at night, and then for some reason we started just dubbing that period of the night sacred time. So when it came time to brand a podcast, it seemed like an absolute no-brainer. We got to try to maintain that energy that we had. Hopefully not too much. We'll try to avoid too much of the weird shit, if possible. I can't promise, although, because, I don't know, it's not how my brain works, unfortunately. But, no, one of the things that I was going to ask you to circle back to the original conversation that we were having a second ago, you mentioned that the conversation that you and I had in the basement in regards to with my dad and stuff like that, you said that you were really scared, and that's a really interesting point to make, because that's part of the reason that I didn't want to talk I didn't want to talk about it with anybody.
Right.
I could sense that with most people. As a matter of fact, there was a story that happened that I think I talked to you about. It was about a week before then. I was at school, and it was the first day that I went back after everything had happened. And nobody was fully aware. I think the people my age and who hung out within my group kind of had a little bit of the information because, you know, friends talk and stuff like that.
Right.
But the teachers were not aware because apparently my mom told the counselors, like, hey, don't get into it. I don't know why, but so my teachers didn't know, and I didn't know that they didn't know. So I went into school assuming that the teachers were aware of what was going on. And I remember that this was one of the hardest moments for me, and as weird as it sounds, it had nothing to do with me specifically, but, like, it made the whole topic that much more uncomfortable to me. You know what I mean? Like, it made me kind of shy away from it a little bit more because I was in class. Somebody asked me where I'd been. I explained to them what happened. It was like the first conversation that I had when I got to school, so it immediately bummed me out. So I'm sitting there, I'm starting to feel kind of sad now because, you know, I just reminded myself of everything that was going on. And then my teacher comes over and she gives me the paper, and then she, like, you know, walked around. It was like the opening sheet for math class or whatever, like, do these 15 problems in the first 20 minutes and then we'll start the class or whatever happens. So then she comes back around and I only did like 2 of them, right? And I'm like struggling and I'm just sitting there kind of thinking more than anything. And then she was like, are you going to do the problems? And I was like, if I'm being completely honest, like, I'm kind of struggling right now. And she was like, do you need help with it? And I was like, no, I don't think I'm going to do it. And she was like, okay, well, if you're not going to do it, and she started giving me like an attitude. And in the moment I was like, oh, damn, she's a bitch.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you're a cold-hearted person, lady. You know what I mean? Like, you're taking out some shit on me, and that's not fair at all. I feel like I'm allowed a moment right now. But it pissed me off, and I, like, shut down, and I was kind of out of it. And then the rest of the day I didn't do anything, and I was stubborn. I gave her an attitude. I probably swore at her, unfortunately. That's a bad tendency that I have sometimes. So then the next class, I'm sitting there, and the girl who I spoke with at the beginning of the class, after class, spoke with the teacher and let her know what was going on. And she didn't know what was going on, so this was the first that she was hearing of it. So I'm in my next hour, and then suddenly we get a knock at the door, and she's like, hey, Dennis, can you come here? And I'm like, oh, shit, I'm about to get in trouble for this. Like, I thought I'm getting pulled out of class, and she's about to say, like, hey, that was bullshit, and you're disrespectful, and you're grounded or suspended or whatever they would do.
Right.
And so she pulls me out of the class, and then I saw the look in her eyes, and it was just fucking pure pain, you know what I mean? Like, she realized what was going on, and that shit broke my heart so bad. So it was a difficult conversation to approach. So like I said, I appreciated when you and I got into it, and then it opened up a Pandora's box of many other conversations that we've since spent the rest of our lives talking about. And I'm very grateful for that. I know it was a little bit of a backtrack, but when we were finishing up the story, I wanted to tell that story, and you kind of started jumping into something else. So I just hijacked the conversation and went back to where I wanted to go.
Like,
now
what
you're
needs
in
to
control
happen
again. You can take
sometimes.
the conversation from here. You're more than welcome to.
No problem, man. Like I said, for me, it was, you know, kind of fuck whatever anxiety I had about whether or not how you would respond to me asking the question. At the end of the day, I was like, I wouldn't be okay with like trying to go on with that night and not acknowledge it. Not when it was already referenced, we talked about it, and I could tell it was something still obviously heavy on your heart. Not to say I ever thought you were just okay But like you said, like you also, when we talked, and for the most part, when we did other stuff, it was kind of like everything was normal. So it's
Yeah, it's a weird position to be in. It's a difficult spot, but I do think
yeah,
it's good for people who are dealing with people in those situations. Like, you got to wait for somebody to kind of give you something, but when they do give it to you, take full advantage of it.
yep,
That's how I've always felt in dealing with people in those situations when people are struggling with grief or in mourning or with anything bad, to be completely honest, even if it's just like a rough week or whatever the case is. When they start to give you a little bit, that's your chance to ask.
exactly.
Do you think that do you think most people feel responsive to those questions in your experiences? Or do you feel like it's a very difficult situation to approach unless you do have a connection with somebody, though?
It's very dependent on the individual, I think, because, like I said, so one point I didn't make about that earlier story was the guy who's being bullied. He was being bullied because he was gay, and he was. There were things known about him that because he was gay was made into a bigger thing than what it should have been. He was a
Yeah.
huge Mariah Carey fan. Would
Who
actually
isn't?
took exactly actually took singing lessons, so he would be in there like legit singing songs, hitting them high notes and all that. And he also did dance, so he got mercilessly bullied for that. And it was one of those things where, like, I seen it, I knew about it, didn't know him, I never reached out. But in that one moment where we were there, and actually, if I remember right, he was crying a little bit and got embarrassed because I seen him, and I told him, "Hey, man, don't worry about it. I get it." And then we started talking from that point on. I will say, because of the type of person I knew him to be, by the little bit I knew about him, I knew he responded great to that, because it was like, hey, this is one of the few times that since you've been here that anyone's actually listened to you, took a chance to give a shit about whatever you were about, whatever mattered to you, and didn't shit on you for liking different things than other people. But at the same time, there might be somebody who they are more of a, I don't know what's the correct term, but if they're more like eternal with some of those things where, hey, it sucks, but I kind of got my own way of dealing with it, whether it's healthy or not. Reaching out may not matter, or they may just think like, oh, well, yeah, I see you're doing this, but they already have some idea in their head about how, oh, you're only doing it for this reason, or yeah, you're saying all this, but I'm not really buying it. So I think it's still worth it, because I look at it, if there's a 50-50 chance that me speaking and saying something is going to help them, or just like they're like whatever about it, there's still that chance that it could help. And the other end of it is it doesn't, and that's unfortunate, but at least there wasn't just like it left to their own thoughts and own issues with it. It's difficult because I get where you don't want to be like intrusive and in somebody's own shit about it,
Yeah,
but
it's a difficult conversation to
yeah.
approach sometimes. It's a really weird, like, balancing act of I don't want to cross a line, but at the same time, I also know that with feelings, sometimes you do have to kind of press in order to actually get information out of somebody. And it's difficult because sometimes, like, I've been there personally where when I do have that conversation, like, in a non-comfortable situation, I will overshare unintentionally. Do you know what I mean? And then you pull back after that a lot more, because then sometimes you'll share a bit of information with somebody that's maybe too personal for where your relationship is at.
Mhm.
And then you're kind of like, oh no, I don't want to talk to you anymore. You know what I mean? Like, you accidentally got some real shit.
No, yeah, it is that. And the best thing I could say to it is, as long as you're not trying to tell someone how to feel about something, like sometimes people go that route of, oh, I want to help this person, so they go up and they tell them, hey, well, this is what I did and this is all you have to do and you'll be okay. That's never the route, because as soon as you start saying that, oh, I know this and this is all you got to do, then a lot of people, I won't say all people, but a lot of people will just take that as you're dismissing their own feelings and you just know what's right. And whatever they're feeling, even if it is maybe not technically correct, they still have to explore that and have to accept that themselves that it's not correct if that's the case. You can tell people the right answer all day, but if they're not willing to accept that, it doesn't matter. So
Absolutely. So I guess one quick question then, while we're on the subject of the kind of conversations that led to us starting this podcast and our relationship leading into it. Now that we've started officially doing Sacred Time once again, what are you hoping to accomplish in regards to the viewer? Like, if you could send a message to the people who are going to be watching the show, what do you hope to accomplish through Sacred Time?
Honestly, kind of what we just talked about. My hope for this podcast and for anyone listening is that whatever way you went in listening to it, whether you had a great day or you had a bad day, you had a rough day, whatever is going on, and if listening to us and the conversations we have can either, help you better deal with a situation on your end or motivate you to do better at whatever problem or whatever situation you're working on currently, that's a win for me. Like, I'm in no way saying that I'm a motivational speaker, because I'm not, but at the same time, I know there's a lot of things that I struggle with and have beaten, and things I still struggle with today, that having a simple conversation with somebody that I know cared was enough for me to kind of get myself to that next point. So to the same thing, I want to have these conversations and be open and honest about them. But then if there's ever something that people have a question about or just want input on it, I'm all there for it. I want to have that dialogue with everyone, because that's what, like I said, stuff like podcasts, advancements in technology that we have, to where here we are talking, we're not even in the same room, but we see each other, we hear each other, and everyone else is going to be able to do the same. We should use that to better ourselves in any way possible. And if it's as simple as just having a bit of humanity, to care for each other, to have interesting conversations, and to be open to those opinions, like that's what we should do. That's what the effort should be. So that's what I'm hoping we get from this. But I know we'll get from it.
You have way better motivations than I do. I was just looking for an excuse to tell dick jokes.
I mean, hey, you can't really go on stage anywhere right now, so if you're gonna tell dick jokes, just don't do what some people have been doing. Like they've done like stand up, and they do stand up like they're in front of a live audience, so it's awkward because
at home.
Like we're doing right now.
Like they just start pacing around their house.
But well, probably that too. But like, I mean, in the sense of like actual beats, like, you know how you'll tell a joke and you do it in a way to where you let the audience kind of get involved in it. I'm not saying all, and I'm damn sure not a comedian to say or have enough what you call it, not a reputation, credentials, whatever you want to call it.
Reputation.
I'm not a comedian. I don't get paid for it.
Career.
So
yeah.
Take my opinion about it as you will, but it's awkward as shit when someone's having a conversation and you're giving a pause for a reaction as if you would if you had a live audience, but you don't have a live audience. So it's like they're just talking and they'll say the joke, and then they go on from there. But it's like, why the pause? Like, at that point, you just roll into the next one, I think. But
I'll say, if you're a comedian, in your defense, you obviously have to work the room first and foremost. So if you're working a different platform than an audience, then you should probably adapt accordingly. But I guess if those are jokes that you're going to be using for the stage, you might as well get yourself conditioned and performing them the way that you're going to when you're in front of an audience.
I guess.
You know what I mean? Then I guess if you get too used to telling the jokes without the beats, then you start telling the jokes like you're in a podcast in front of a live audience. You know what I mean? Then it kind of evens itself out a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a way to go about it. It's not my profession to be able to say what's the right way or wrong way, but...
Actually, I was going to say, one of the things that I was really excited about getting into at one point in the podcast, and I guess we'll just start off with it. Do you remember your stand-up routine?
Gosh damn it. No.
You don't remember your stand-up routine?
I remember this really bad joke I had that was literally somebody else's stand-up routine, but
Oh,
because it wasn't mine.
Dennis Leary.
Was it?
Holy shit, dude.
Oh, Dennis. I don't know. No,
You're like Carlos Mencia.
yeah, basically, yeah. Because I mean, the problem. Not only was it like you're stealing jokes, but then because it wasn't your joke, when you hear the original, like, oh, now I get how this joke was supposed to sound.
If it makes you feel any better, all of the funny stuff was entirely you.
That's fine.
Like what worked about the joke had nothing to do with the joke. It was all you. So I'll run through it with people.
God damn it, no.
I remember it verbatim. I remember it better than you do, apparently.
Yeah.
So one time we were hanging, I was in the basement and he came over. Maurice just lived 2 houses down from where I lived at the time when we were kids, so he would spend a lot of time.
Yeah, we were kids, by the way. Let's emphasize that, because I'm not doing that shit
16 or 17 right now.
I was
think,
a kid.
as a matter of fact, I might have been in my senior year of high school. You may have already been graduated at the time.
So
you had
I'm
a lot
still
of extra
not
time on
like
your
an
hands.
actual adult at this point.
You said what?
I'm not. I'm just making an emphasis that in this day and age, I would never do some shit like that. Yeah, I thought it was funny in the moment, but
So he's done with puberty and stuff already, and he comes over to my house, and he's like, "Hey, I got a stand-up routine, or not a routine." He's like, "I got an idea for a joke. I want to run it by you." So I remember the joke, and I'll tell the joke too. And I don't know who to credit the joke with. I don't know who to credit the joke.
Me either.
Or I don't know who to
forgot.
credit the joke with, because I don't know who you stole the routine from now. But I was under the impression that this was a Big Blurred original.
No.
But you come over, and the best part about it was your body language, because you went to perform it like on a stage. So when you stood up, you like puffed your chest out first of all, like you wanted like a really big, confident posture when you're doing your stand-up act, because nothing's funnier than being the alpha. You already got the wrong mindset going in. You know what I mean? You got to be the guy that they laugh at, not the guy that they're scared of.
True.
But so you come in there and you got your chest all puffed out. You start doing like this really cocky swagger when you're walking back and forth. So then you start going through and you do the joke, and the setup to the joke was, so I got a roommate and he's actually a vegan. He just recently switched over to a full vegan diet, and the other day he and I get into arguments all the time about what's better, vegan food or regular vegan food. He doesn't drink regular dairy. He does his almond milk and stuff like that, and I drink dairy. So one morning, he makes me a cup of coffee, and we always argue about what's better, regular dairy or the almond milk, and gives me a cup of coffee, and he's like, "How's that cup of coffee?" I'm like, it's pretty good. And he's like, "Oh, cool, there's almond milk in it." And I was like, damn, he got me. So anyways, the next morning, he starts doing your swagger again. Anyways, the next morning, I wake up, and I make the guy a cup of coffee, and he takes a drink, and I'm like, "How is that?" And he's like, "Oh, it's pretty good." And I'm like, "Cool. I fucked your girlfriend." Then you did like the cartoon thing where you like did like, "Whoop." Well, that's just what I did. Like I was gonna zoom in on you or something like that. But I was impressed that you gave it an effort. I'm really sad to hear that wasn't an original routine. I thought the one thing that you really needed to work on was your body language. And it turns out that was the one thing that was working for you. What you need to work out on is not stealing material. We just started, Maurice.
Hey,
Blurred.
in my defense, that was the thing to do in high school anyway, was somebody said something funny, you just repeat it multiple times.
Oh, I agree completely. That's most of my jokes when I was younger, were just stealing shit from like Chris Rock or
Dave Chappelle.
or somebody like that.
To be fair, he also had a sketch show that kind of made some of the points were like kind of literally made in a way that became catchphrases.
Yeah, exactly. I did that a lot with TV shows where I used to do a lot of Will Ferrell quotes too when I was younger.
Yeah.
Like the dumb shit he would say. I'd be like, "I'm hilarious."
But I mean, it worked because whether you were hilarious or it was close enough that you remembered the real thing, that's basically how it worked.
I agree. Whatever happened to your stand-up career? Why'd you give up on that?
I found out it wasn't really funny. Like I have a pretty good sense of humor, but in terms of writing, I'm terrible. So
Joke delivery and stuff like that. I think
yeah.
you're a funny guy. I think the funniest thing, you came over to want to do the last podcast. It's the last one I'll do on you, don't worry.
No, it's fine.
When you came over to do one of the last podcasts when we were shooting it at the apartment still before everything got crazy, you came over and you had a hole in your sock that nobody noticed. So you wanted to draw attention to it, I guess, to kind of beat us to the punch. So you came over and you made like this really weird comment where you like walked in, you're like, yeah, and I know half my foot's hanging out. We're like, what? You're like, I know half my foot's hanging out. We're like, your shoes are still on. What the fuck are you talking about, man? And then you took your shoes off and you showed us, and it was like that big of a hole. It wasn't even that bad, and it was on the bottom of your sock too, so we would have never seen it. But then I remember the funniest part about it was when we said what the second time. You were like, nothing. It was just a joke I had coming in. It wasn't funny anyways. Let's go ahead and start the podcast.
Basically.
Like, see, you still got you do funny shit still. Everybody's got their things.
Nah, writing. That's my biggest thing. And I don't have the ability to do it like off top of my head, just easy. Unless it's like a dick joke. But those are too easy.
Or that's what she said, or a response to something that's already.
Well, I mean, I could do better than that's what she said, but I'm just saying, like, I'm also like only a little bit better than that's what she said.
Just a little bit better than that's what she said. Gotcha.
Sorry, you gotta give props. If I ran a 4.4, I ran a 4.4, not a 4.5. I didn't run either. I think the fastest I've ever ran was a 5.9. 5.9.
5.9. That's under 6.
5. Yeah, I'd say about 5.9.
I've never been timed. I've never been clocked on a 40-yard dash.
Here's the thing. They're not fun. They're not fun unless you're actually fast. Here's the sad part. Like, I remember I ran my first 40 and the disappointment on my coaches' faces.
When they saw your time.
Like before I even got to the finish line, it was just like disappointment. Just pure disappointment.
Trying out as a running back, though?
No. This was, I don't even know why we were just doing 40s for some reason.
Yeah.
And these were actually clocked. So, no, actually, no, that was when they started taking it serious. That was the issue. Or not the issue, but when they started taking it serious, so then,
seriously.
like, well, we started actually uploading our stuff to
Max Preps.
Max Preps.
Yep.
So you can go in there and you can see your 40 time, you can see your bench, all that kind of stuff. But that's when they started doing the 1,000-pound club. So we actually had goals and things to be like, hey, this is where you're at, instead of just here's some helmets, have fun. Yeah. Which I feel like was all of football until we had that coach change my junior year. But that was the unfun part, was just the fact that, again, if you're fast, it's cool. Even if you weren't the fastest, it was just fun to compete. I knew I wasn't competing with nobody. So it was just like, all right, well.
That's a funny one. You played, what, left tackle, right tackle?
Yeah, basically everywhere on the line except for center.
Everywhere except center.
I was supposed to be, but then I couldn't snap for shit in grass. That's the funny part. All through the summer on the basketball court, no problem. As soon as we get to grass, it was like, oh shit, I get hit with some fucking kryptonite or some shit. I just lost all power.
You just fall over forward. You can't get your balance or anything like that.
I don't know what it was. I didn't think it was going to
surface. Were you able to like snap it off better when it was?
I think what it was is
more
like
resistance with the grass, like it was trying to like kill the momentum on it some.
So it was more. What I'm trying to say, it was like it was more friction. So where on the basketball court it was just kind of slip and there was no issues there. On the grass where I needed to be as low as I needed to be at center, it just wasn't working.
That's how it was. Doing baseball practice on a basketball court is 1,000 times scarier, because when the ball hits the grass, it generally slows down a little.
Yeah, it loses momentum.
Yeah, it doesn't happen when it hits the court.
No.
It gains momentum and it starts coming at you faster, so it like skips and picks up speed.
Yep.
So like, hey, we're gonna do some ground ball drills. Ready? You're like, no.
Yeah, there's definitely some questionable things that happen with high school sports, but that's also where you kind of learn to be a man sometimes. Sometimes.
Well, if you take the lessons that you learned from high school sports and you feel like that's all that you need to be a man, then those are probably
Nah,
most.
I was
saying
saying more so
to be
like just the shit
problematic.
you're exposed to, like shit like that, like baseballs flying at you, bouncing on basketball courts, shit like
I
that.
get you
Like
prepared for life.
you gotta stop being a
Like,
bitch.
the
at
real
some
world's not
point.
easy, kid. Yeah, they're not throwing baseballs at me really fast in the real world. That doesn't happen very often.
True.
You got to pay bills.
Well, it's a mental thing because sometimes that's how bills feel. Like a
how they
baseball
feel.
being,
Picking up
yeah,
steam.
dude.
It's a big
Somebody
metaphor.
just throwing straight gas at you.
I watched a kid get clocked in the face with a baseball, and his tooth fell out, but he had braces in, so it was just hanging in his braces. I've never seen Bills do that to anybody.
It feels that way sometimes, man.
I guess I can't.
Yeah, and I'm just saying. You ask some folks, they probably take that baseball instead of deal with some of the bills.
I guess that, I mean, it depends on how old you are. If those are my first teeth, my baby teeth as they call them, and I know they're going to grow back, go ahead and knock them all out. But if those are my full adult teeth, then I'm going to also have to pay bills on top of getting my face smoked because I'm going to have to get my teeth reinstalled.
Well, I
Maybe
don't
that's
think
the
anyone's throwing a
medical term.
baseball at a child because that's the only way to be your new teeth.
Well, then I don't want to get hit in the face with a baseball unless I'm a little kid.
All right.
But then if I'm a little kid, I got to worry about like brain damage worse because it's a developing brain, and there's just too many variables at this point. This question stresses me out.
It's the important ones, man. These are the ones that get your brain working and enable
like
you to
that.
think outside the box. Because I never even considered like, oh shit, then you would have to get, you'd have bills to get veneers to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
But
when
I
you're
guess
a
I was-
kid, your parents pay your bills. They don't make you start paying those until you turn a certain age. And speaking of outside of the box, I hate sitting down in front of a camera. This shit is so physically uncomfortable. I feel like I'm stuck and I can't get out of this little area and I have to like stay working within here, and I move around much too often to deal with something like this.
yeah,
These are
I
first world
have,
problems, but
I got a serious pain in like my left hip right now from how I'm sitting on this couch. That I'm like, I want to adjust, but then I just fuck up the shot. So, you know, just gonna
you
power
might
through it right
adjust if you want
now.
to. I don't think anybody would hold it against you at this point.
Probably not.
My guess is we're 47 minutes in. Yeah, people probably turned the podcast off about 46, 47 minutes ago now at this point.
Fair.
But no, there was one topic specifically that you did bring up that you did want to get into for this week's episode.
Yep.
There was a quote that you thought that was interesting, and I guess this is a really good conversation for us to start with in week one, because I feel like this conversation is fairly representative of a lot of conversations that we've had over our course of being friends with one another, and I think this quote probably does set the tone for where we're at on a lot of things. So I don't know if you want me to read the quote and then you can give your response, or if you'd like to read the quote yourself.
You know, I know a second ago we were looking at an article because unfortunately right now for some reason I'm blanking a little bit on the context of what calls for the quote to even be made.
I don't know. It's Charles Barkley, so he probably just brought that shit up out of nowhere, to be completely honest. But I guess
I
to
know,
give
yeah.
context, at the Final Four recently, there was a quote that you thought that was interesting from Charles Barkley, and I'll read it off real quick, and then you can tell me. So the quote that you found interesting was, I'm not going to do it in a Chuck impression as much as
No.
I want to. It'll get annoying pretty quick. But, man, I think most white people and black people are great people. I really believe that in my heart. But I think our system is set up where our politicians, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, are designed to make us not like each other so they can keep their grasp of money and power. They divide and conquer, said Barkley, who retired from the NBA in 2000. Follow-up quote here. I truly believe in my heart most white people and black people are awesome people, but we're so stupid following our politicians, whether they're Republicans or Democrat, and their only job is, hey, let's make these people not like each other. We don't live in their neighborhoods. We got all the money. Let's make the whites and blacks not like each other. Let's make rich people and poor people not like each other. Let's scramble the middle class. I truly believe that in my heart, he continued.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, it was because the game that he was, presenting for. It was on the anniversary. I believe it was on April 4th, which is the anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination. So, that being said, when he kind of made that quote, besides where it was coming from, what I found interesting about it was just that here's somebody who's a prominent figure in the right, to where they're a what's the word I'm trying to say? They're a recognizable celebrity, and to just kind of say that on live television is something that I feel like I would hope most people are aware of or understand the concept of, but nowadays you don't necessarily see it as much, in terms of sometimes there's certain conversations and arguments that are happening on social media about topics dealing with race, dealing with certain just viewpoints on policies that a lot of times, not every time, but a lot of times, it's literally so obvious that there's an idea that's being pushed out to pit people against each other, rather than coming together to have a honest conversation about what's the best thing for everyone. And he just laid it out there for exactly what it was. Like it's not just Republicans, it's not just Democrats, it's not the left and the right. It's the same people who've been playing that same game of how do we make sure that people don't get along too well together, that we can't influence decisions, we can't influence politics, we can't influence law changes and how the government's going to work, because, well, if everyone's on the same side and on the same issues, they're going to look and realize, hey, we're all over here. We are missing good healthcare. We're missing enough. What's the word I'm going for? We don't have the means to provide for ourselves in some basic ways that should be just a human right, like accessibility to clean water, accessibility to healthcare when needed, and not having to pay these just stupid amounts of money for something that should be a basic human right, like being able to be healthy. You can put the argument however you want about that. Well, when you have a capitalist system, it drives innovation, it drives making people having to be the best of their class, because that's how you're going to make the most money. But we already know, like, that's not even really how this system works for us. It's not really based off of who's got the best and who's going to the cream of what's the saying, the cream of the crop always rises or whatever. It's not necessarily that. It's this built system where the people who have the power, who have the influence, who have the money, maintain a way to keep that in their circle, to keep that in their group, whether that's passing it down to families, or again, it becomes hey, once you're in this politics space, you're on a whole another planet from other people, because you're finding information about I'm getting a little bit off topic, but you're on the inside of a lot of things about what's actually going on in this country, and more times than not, the choice that's made is not for the betterment of everyone in this country. It's for whoever's going to fill their pockets, whoever's going to pay them to make sure that a certain law gets passed that aids this billion-dollar company or aids this trillion-dollar federation of companies or whatever. Then it's going to be, okay, what is the best thing for the environment right now? That's going to keep this planet that we're destroying healthy. What's the best thing for the average American, to where having access to cleaner, healthier foods is something that's as easy as going to McDonald's and getting a McDouble. Like certain things that should be obvious, it should be a certain way, that aren't, because of just greed. And it's interesting because like when we were looking at it, it's not like a lot of people really talked about what he said, but it is something to highlight, because my hope, at least, is that more people like him start to bring this up, because at the end of the day, unless you have a certain amount of clout, most people aren't going to tune in or care about what you have to say about something. But when you do have those people starting to point people in the right direction, it's still going to be on the individual to do your research, to be more informed about how these things are working, and to question certain standards that are kind of set in front of us, where we're supposed to just expect that, oh, because I'm a black male, I should vote Democrat, or oh, because I'm this, I shouldn't vote for this, or I shouldn't vote for that. There's nothing that is ever black and white like that. There's always nuance, there's always gray areas to things. So that's why it's important to be informed and to make more informed decisions with that information. But if the people aren't getting told that, and instead are just getting everything fed to them as, okay, are you team red or are you team blue about this situation, that's where they're going to stop. They're not going to take that time to really look into these things. But hopefully, with more conversations like that happening on a national level, more people will start to kind of think that way.
Yeah, I like the part in the comment where he highlights that a lot of people are way too caught up in their politics, because I do believe that that's absolutely true. I think there are a lot of specific topics and specific causes that a lot of people hold very true and dear to their heart, and obviously a lot of people are going to advocate for those, and they're going to express their opinions on a consistent basis. And I think some situations aren't meant to be political. They're meant from a different place, but unfortunately politics does have way too deep of a root in almost everything in the world right now, in my opinion. I think everything is political, and that makes me uneasy very often, because I know that it's better that way for politicians, because then it makes everything really simple, and it makes it really easy to phrase and present certain topics in certain ways for the purpose of attracting voters, as opposed to having a nuanced conversation about how to potentially resolve some of these issues. So Charles Barkley, I've always liked Charles Barkley. He's a funny guy. I love watching the
He's an honest guy.
the
I
NBA thing. And I agree completely. I don't always agree with everything that he says, but one of the things that I've always really appreciated about Charles Barkley is he is in no way, shape, or form afraid of sharing his opinion, regardless of whether or not people are going to agree with it. And sometimes he shares his opinion and he finds out pretty fucking quick that you are very alone in that form of thinking. But at the same time, I like when people are willing to express their thoughts and their opinions, even if people don't always agree with them, because I think the world's a... I don't know if it's weird, because sometimes when you hear people's opinions, right, you're like, oh, that opinion is problematic. I don't want you to share that opinion because I'm scared people are going to take that opinion on. But I like knowing that that's what they think. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
Especially if I disagree with them. Like, I'd rather not live in a world where everybody learns what's the right thing to say so that you never make anybody mad or offended, but that doesn't necessarily represent the way that they feel. I like there being less of a filter so that people tell me how they feel, because it makes it easier to dictate what I want to do in life, you know what I mean, and who I want to be around. Like, I don't know. It's interesting. It is an interesting situation. I agree. Fuck
Yeah.
division. People are better, stronger, unified, no matter what. I think the race conversation specifically is one that there's a very deep-rooted history, and there's a lot of therapy, and there's a lot of conversations that need to be had, and there's a lot that needs to be done to grow the relationship. You know what I mean? I agree with that wholeheartedly, but at the same time, I do think that sometimes from the top it feels like they don't want it to be healed, because it's easier to present things when it's a little more black and white, like you mentioned a little bit earlier.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I said. There's so many examples. It would almost be just redundant to sit here and try to go through and say, well, hey, look at this situation, or look at this situation. Like, it's known and it's seen that clearly things have been are put out in ways to speak to certain agendas, rather than just stating the facts and allowing people as individuals to decide how they feel about it. I mean, just recently, 60 Minutes got caught doing that, and it sucks because they've been, historically, like, pretty accurate, pretty unbiased, like a source of news you could go to and know that their reporting was done thoroughly and it was done fairly. It wasn't done with a certain bias going in to lean this way or that way. Unfortunately, now that's something that could potentially be questioned going forward because essentially they did this piece about the Florida governor, and they it was about Publix, which is like a big chain of grocery store in Florida. Um, had won this bid to be like the number one distributor of vaccines in a certain area, and they tied it to, oh well, they also made $100,000 campaign donation to this guy, and they couldn't interview him directly. So when he had like a press conference at some point, they went to the press conference, asked him some questions, he gave an answer, and the way they edited it sounded very much like he was saying, oh well, I talked to this person and this person, that's how we got here. And then they got a quote from someone saying, oh well, actually he never talked to me. So they framed it like, oh, this is all a lie. Publix got this bid because they made this donation. This guy's shitty. And they also I think there was one other part to the story, but the main thing was when you actually go to the interview that he had during that press conference and everything he says it from a whole other perspective where it's like, hey, first off, Publix wasn't like the only one we went with. They first went to CVS and Walgreens, and then after certain debates and conversations with the people in the county in which Publix is now the number one place for it, they were like, hey, look, it actually makes sense to do it this way. Most of our elderly population in that area is Palm Beach County, I think it was. They're all like within a mile or a mile and a half of a Publix, so it only makes sense to do it at Publix. It'll work better that way, and that's why they went with it. It had nothing, again, based off of that information, we don't really know. It was nothing to do about whether they made a donation or not. Now, that shows a problem with politicians accepting donations, but the issue is you guys pushed so hard to make it look like this guy, this Republican governor, was doing this bad thing, and then now you just got caught up in that, which only empowered him. So he, I can't remember his name. I think it's like DeSantis, as I believe is his last name. But
yeah, I'd have to look into this. I'd be interested in next week picking back up on this and jumping into it a little bit more. Following up, I get a chance to read up on the situation. I'm not very familiar with the story, but I am very familiar with the media misrepresenting things.
Yeah,
it's a very accurate thing. That's undoubted, and it sucks. It's like that, but that is unfortunately how it is. And I think it's interesting because you mentioned with the 60 Minutes thing, with them being like a trusted source, and it's kind of funny that their format is the 60 Minutes. Like, we're gonna do more. It's not like your nightly news where you get 2 minutes on a story or 5 minutes on a story maximum. Like, the 60 Minutes, we're going to go a little bit more in depth, but it's tough sometimes to give all matter of context. Like I said, I'm not familiar with the conversation itself, so I want to kind of withhold too strong of an opinion on anything like that before I look into it. But it's an interesting conversation. I'd be interested in following up on that if you would for the next episode a little bit.
Absolutely. I think
which is my polite way of wrapping us up.
Yeah.
You got anything you want to close out with before we go?
Other than, if you're interested in that story, definitely look into it. Like I said, we'll talk about it a little bit next week. But to that same point, just vet your sources. Whatever information you're getting from the internet, again, anyone can go in there and say anything is fact. I can go in there and make it look like my net worth is $2 billion. I promise you I'm not worth $2 billion. So just make sure you're questioning it a little bit more. Don't just take everything.
Are you in QAnon?
No, hell no.
Okay.
No. See that? Well, hey, that's my point. If you question things a little bit more, I doubt there'd be so many people in QAnon. But that's a whole nother conversation.
They question everything excessively, even things that we figured out.
Okay, there's
you could prove to me that. No, sure.
There's a scientific way to question things, and then there's a I'm just going to be stubborn because I don't want to believe truth way of just going about. Well, I'm just going to question it because why? Because it's that easy. All you have to do is say why, and you're good. I'm not saying do that.
I understand completely. For everybody listening, we appreciate it. Thank you for taking time out of your day if you did choose to do so. If you'd like more things Sacred Time, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Sacred Time Pod. If you'd like more things from me on Instagram or Twitter, you're shit out of luck. Anything on you, Big Blurred?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Big Blurred. I'm working on other stuff, so we'll have more of that come next week.
More exciting news coming forward. Thank you guys for listening to Sacred Time. Just remember, time is sacred. Thank you.